So much. Thank you very much. Welcome, and coming up in this week's show, Abby is sideways on ice in a 911 Turbo. Richard drives Jim Clark's beautiful Lotus 25, and I nearly fall over. Right, there's a new off-road four-wheel drive Lamborghini. It's called the Urus, and to find out if it's any good, I took the Grand Tour to Sweden, armed with some questions. Here's my first big question. If you build a car to tackle terrain like this, can it still be a proper Lambo? Well, the Urus certainly looks like a jacked-up supercar. With its swivel-eyed styling, it appears to be every inch a Lamborghini. But is it? Turbochargers may be a little bit annoying on the road, but here they're giving with a low-down torque that I need to get up this hill. It's ordered. That's not the... Oh, no! Oh, drive carefully. Whoops. Oh no! Oh God! Oops. This is the first Lamborghini to use turbocharging and the first to have an automatic gearbox. And what that combination means is there's a very slight and rather un-Lamborghini-ish gap between putting your foot down and it getting going. And when it does get going, there are no screaming histrionics. Sure, there's a bit of popping and banging from the back. But you can't hear that inside, where everything is muted and refined. I can see the Pope in one of these. So, it's quiet and a bit hesitant. And it has snazzy diffs and a clever traction control system. and the biggest carbon brakes ever fitted to a road car, so it's safe as well. However, there's no getting around the fact that I'm currently driving on snow and ice in a car that has 641 horsepower rampaging around underneath its bonnet. Which means that actually it's not that safe at all. There's no manual locking differentials, there's no low-range gearbox. All you can do is fire it up and then put the drive system into snow mode. The performance you'd expect, but there's other stuff you wouldn't expect. Very, very quickly here. This car then, it sits right at the moment where excitement stops and terror begins. That is Lambo land, that is. Shit. So, the Urus looks and feels like a Lamborghini. It's also practical. The boot is massive. And inside, there's space for 5 6-footers. It's a nice place to be as well. And all that's great. Which leaves us with one more thing to answer. Is it a good laugh? What we've done is use a snowplow to create a racetrack on this frozen lake. And this is what we have planned. I'm going to try and overtake this, a 4-wheel drive Porsche 911 Turbo, which is being driven by the Grand Tour's racing driver, Abby Eaton. Have you seen this crack?
I hadn't noticed that before.
Look at the state of this.
You're the heavier car, aren't you?
That's 2.4 tons, and I weigh half a ton. Are you not worried about that?
I haven't got my seatbelt on, so if it goes under, I can get out straight away.
Seriously?
Yep.
Before the duel began, I had a few practice laps on my own. Oh, dearie me. Look at that for a tidy line. Get a bloody move on. scary thing here. Right. Oh, God, that looks tricky. Yes! Very quick. Oh, look at that for a tidy line. I love speeding. Yes, it may not be able to get as far up a ski slope as a Range Rover, but for doing this, it's better.
But would it be good enough to get past Abby in that Porsche?
There she is. There she is. The bell has sounded. The race is on.
Now we'd find out what's what on our specially designed trek.
Make this car, Lambo's engineers had a good run in Volkswagen parts built. So the engine, a V8, is from the rear axle and air suspension is from a Bentley. The platform on which it sits and a lot of the dashboard is from Audi 7. So does that mean this isn't really a Lamborghini at all? Oh, my Urus is a bit twitchy. What do you think you say to your doctor? Oh, God, that looks tricky. Can I go a bit faster? Drive carefully. Here we go. Come on, you can have her. Come on.
For lap after lap, the big, heavy Urus clawed at the rear end of the 911 Turbo.
Oh, God. Really? No.
But eventually, I had to admit defeat.
I can't get past that 911, and that's just an end of it. But I can keep up. And in an off-road car, that is fairly astonishing. It really is.
Certainly, I can believe Lamborghini's claim that this is the fastest off-road car in the world.
Fun, yeah, nice day out.
I got paid for that.
That was your job.
It was work. Doing that is my work. It probably won't be the fastest off-road car in the world for very long, though, because both Aston Martin and Ferrari have got big SUVs coming out this year.
Yeah, whatever. Thing is, could you really tell people that you have a Urus? Because It sounds like a minor alien out of Star Trek.
Yeah.
But it does work as a Lamborghini.
Yeah. But no.
Well, this is excellent consumer advice.
Yeah,
I'm sadly...
very clear, very clear.
The thing is, after I made that film, which was quite good fun, I came home and I thought, the trouble is, it could do with being a bit more Aventador-ish. It could do with being a bit more mad.
Are you saying you changed your mind?
Yes.
Oh, great. So Prime Minister Clarkson returns from the summit. I've declared war. But on the plane home, I had another think about it, and I'm not so sure now. I've changed my mind.
Exactly, that's what I've done.
Good. Well, since we're in such a sensible frame of mind, I'd like to move things on now with a brief history lesson. On April the 7th, 1968, a racing driver was killed in a Formula 2 race in Hockenheim, Germany. Sadly, the driver's death was not a surprising occurrence, because such was the danger of the sport back then. He was one of 127 racing drivers who would die at the wheel that year alone. This time, though, the death sent shockwaves through the motorsport world, because it had just lost the man who was unquestionably the greatest racing driver of his day, and who many argue is still the greatest of all time.
Jim Clark has died in an accident during a Formula 2 race in West Germany.
It was a terrible shock to everybody. It really knocked us all back. If there was anybody who was not going to have a fatal accident, it was Jim Clark, because he drove in such a way that he just didn't do the mistakes that other drivers did.
In California, a radio station broadcaster announcing the news of Clark's death asked his listeners to turn on their headlights as a mark of respect, and the freeways lit up. Such a huge global fuss would not have sat easily with Clark, because this shy, modest man, the son of a Scottish sheep farmer, was never one to trumpet his own skills.
I started as an amateur with no idea or no intention of becoming world champion, but I was curious to find out what it was like to drive a car fast, to drive on a certain circuit, to drive a certain type of car.
Having cut his teeth in sports car racing in the late 50s, Clark's speed and talent was spotted by Lotus boss Colin Chapman, who signed him for his Formula 1 team in 1960. Clark soon set the motorsport world alight, especially in this car. The Lotus 25, in which, in 1963, he won his first F1 World Championship.
Oh my God! I am sitting where Jim Clark sat! Again. Go, go, go!
Oh, I'm slightly alarmed. I was born to do this! Thanks to its revolutionary monocoque chassis, the 25 was stiffer and lighter than any other F1 car, which meant it wasn't just fast on the straights, but quicker through the corners too.
Go!
I shall be victorious. Time to play. Power, this is good.
And in the 1963 season, Clark used it to win a record 7 out of the 10 Grand Prix.
Winner is Jim Clark. Nobody could possibly catch him now.
But 1963 was just a warm-up for what was to come. To get a true picture of Clark's genius, we must look at another year, 1965, when he hit heights no driver had reached before, or has done since.
A modern Formula One driver does 21 races a year and often complains that's too many. In 1965, Jim Clark raced in 63 races. Some of these cars look similar, but they are all completely different. In a car like this, he'd do Formula One Championship. He raced in the British Formula 2 Championship and the French Formula 2 Championship in this car. He raced in the Tasman Series, a sort of Australian Grand Prix for Down Under, in this car. And then there's this Lotus Cortina, in which he decided to race in touring cars. And then if all that wasn't enough, he decided to go for the Indy 500.
First up was the Tasman Series in Australasia. Out of the 15 races, Clark won 11 and took the crown. Then it was back to Europe for the British and French Formula 2 Championships, both of which he won.
Jim Clark led from the start. Winner is Jim Clark.
And in between the F2 races, he was jumping into his Lotus Cortina and racking up touring car victories.
Go! Yeah!
Watch this. Now this bit is really scary.
Unleash the beast!
Absolutely creamed it. right there. Oh, here we go, here we go. Gotta keep the pressure on. This is dangerous because of you. Right, we're all set. Come on, this is it. Exactly. Are you ready?
And on top of all that, there was America.
The Indianapolis 500 has been called the greatest spectacle in racing.
America's most prestigious race would be a tough challenge. Oval racing at higher average speeds than he was used to against seasoned Indy veterans. For the Indy 500, Clark raced a specially developed Lotus producing just shy of 500 horsepower. However, although he already had a Formula One world title to his name, the Scotsman's CV cut no ice with the sniffy Indy officials, who made the upstart from across the pond take a rookie driving test before he could compete.
Go, go, go!
Come Indy weekend, the upstart from across the pond qualified on the front row. And then, in the race itself, Clark, up against America's finest oval racers, won by just over 2 minutes.
Jim Clark, first European to win at Indianapolis since 1916, set a new record of 150.686 miles per hour.
So what was it that made Clark so good? What was it that made him capable of winning in any type of car?
Jimmy was an absolute natural driver, and he did it without thinking. He didn't know why he was driving in this style the way he did. In the period that we're talking about, we had 1.5 litre cars, 200 horsepower. If you drove the car too hard, you would scrub the speed off. And if you lose a bit of speed, it's very difficult to actually make it up again. And that's what Jimmy had the knack of, keeping the momentum of the car going. I don't think that any of the modern drivers could have driven the car anywhere near as quickly as Jimmy did, because he was just so precise.
Yeah.
Watch this. Come on, come on, come on.
Besides a supernatural ability to coax speed out of the car, Clark also possessed another vital skill.
A lot of very good racing drivers died in Lotuses because the Lotus was a very fragile car. But Jim Clark was so smooth that he never put too much stress on the areas of a car that would give up.
But don't think for a minute that Clark was one of those drivers that could only win in a perfect car. One year at Spa, for example, he was leading the race when his gearbox started to let go.
Did he give up? Nope. Instead, he drove the rest of the race, and we're talking 160 miles an hour in the wet, with one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding the gear lever in place. And he still won. By nearly 5 minutes. So let's just sum up Clark's season of 1965. Of the 63 races he contested, he won a staggering 31 of them and was on the podium a further 8 times. He was now seen as the greatest racing driver of all time, in demand the world over. Yet this shy Scotsman chose to mark the year's achievements with a modest celebration at his hometown back in Scotland.
The next 2 years, by contrast, were a disaster, with multiple mechanical failures denying him another championship. However, in 1968, driving the Lotus 49, another game-changer from Colin Chapman, Clark took the first win of the year in South Africa and looked set for another dominant season.
Congratulations, Jim. This is an absolutely splendid effort.
Okay, thank you very much. And then, on the weekend of April the 7th, Clark had a choice of 2 races he could compete in. One at Brands Hatch, the other a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim. Fatefully, he entered the German race.
April the 7th is a bad day for me. He wasn't happy. It was freezing cold and damp, misty. We could not get any heat into the tyres. Couldn't get any temperature in them, no matter what we did. Jimmy said to me, "Father, I do not expect anything from me today. Just keep me informed with the pit board, where I am, how many laps to go." That's the last thing he said.
On lap 5, Clark's car suddenly speared off the track at 170 miles an hour. When he died, he was just 32. But in his short career, he had racked up some truly incredible achievements. In Formula One, he won 25 of his 73 races, which in percentage terms puts him way ahead of Hamilton, Vettel and even Schumacher. In pole positions, he had 33, which again in percentage terms makes him second best of all time, just behind Fangio.
He was a benchmark. That was it.
Most of what I was able to do in motor racing was done by the manner in which Jim Clark drove, and I just followed him.
He was a gentleman. He was a gentleman and a gentleman. It's a pity he's not around now, because it'd be nice to have him.
All of that's amazing. What I find truly amazing is how many championships he took part in. I mean, can you imagine Lewis Hamilton getting out of his Formula One car and saying, I haven't got time for any interviews because I've got to go off and do a touring car race? Just wouldn't.
And he did. The other thing that's worth remembering is back in the early 60s, if you went to Australia, if you flew to Australia, that meant 8 stops. Yeah. And there were no flatbed, there weren't even any movies.
Yeah, and let's not forget, he'd get off that aeroplane, do a race, win it, obviously, then get on another aeroplane straight away to France to win a race there.
No, it is astonishing. I mean, everybody has a favourite racing driver. I'm sure everybody here does as well. It's, you know, it's the Senna, Schumacher, Villeneuve, Romain Grosjean, Fangio. But if you use maths to measure a driver's greatness, you have to conclude it was Jim Clark. Good night.